Hello, all. This video is about a poem by Elizabeth Jennings. The poem is named One Flesh and is a beautifully written poem. And the poet talks about the reality of romance and marriages in the long run. So, first, let us look at the poet Elizabeth Jennings. Elizabeth Jennings is an English poet, and she was born in 1926 and died in 2001. As a poet, she was very popular for her thoughtful and emotionally charged poetry. She was born on July 18, 1926, in Boston, in London, in England, and we see that her poetry often explored themes of love, loss, loneliness, and the human condition. So these are her main concerns: themes of love, loss, loneliness, and the general human condition. Now, regarding her education, she attended the Oxford High School for Girls. That's where she did her schooling. And for her graduation, she attended St. Anne's College, Oxford. And after graduating, she worked as a librarian and she also pursued a career in writing. She published her first collection of poems, which was titled Poems, in 1953. So that is her first collection of poems. The title of that collection itself is Poems. And this particular collection, it received critical acclaim and it established her as a prominent poet. And some of her other important poetry collections include A Way of Looking, which was published in 1955, Song for a Birth or a Death, published in 1961, and Lucidites, published in 1970. So these are some of her very famous poetry collections. And even in the poems included in this collection, she presented an introspective view of life. Introspection means looking at oneself. So she gives an introspective view of life and she reflects on human relationships, on nature, and even on spirituality. So that is what her poems in these collections deal with. What are they? It deals with an introspective view of life. It reflects on human relationships. It reflects on nature and spirituality. So these are her major concerns. Okay, and we see that throughout her life, Jennings faced challenges related to mental health. She struggled with depression and it deeply influenced her work. But still, you can see that despite these difficulties, she continued to write prolifically and she gained a very loyal readership. And finally, she passed away on October 26, 2001, leaving behind a legacy of deeply moving and insightful poetry. So, this is a very short bio of the poet Elizabeth Jennings, the English poet Elizabeth Jennings. Now, let's move on to the poem One Flesh. So, first, we'll read the poem, and after that, we'll look at what is it actually about. One Flesh by Elizabeth Jennings. Lying apart now, each in a separate bed. He with a book, keeping the light on late. She like a girl, dreaming of childhood. All men elsewhere. It is as if they wait. Some new event. The book he holds unread, her eyes fixed on the shadows overhead. Tossed up like flotsam from a former passion. How cool they lie. They hardly ever touch, or if they do, it is like a confession of having little feeling or too much. Chastity faces them, a destination for which their whole lives were a preparation. Strangely apart, yet strangely close together, silence between them like a thread to hold and not wind in, and time itself is a feather touching them gently to Do they know they are old? These two, who are my father and my mother, whose fire from which I came has now grown cold. So that's the poem One Flesh. Now let's look at it closely. What is this actually about? What is the poem One Flesh about? Now, the speaker of the poem is a child who looks upon her parents with intrigue. Intrigue means with interest, with a sort of curiosity. The child is looking up upon her parents. The child may be a boy or a girl. The child is looking at its parents with intrigue, with curiosity. Now, what is it that arouses the curiosity? The child is reflecting on its parents who have grown emotionally distant over time. Okay, they're living together, maybe a husband and a wife, the father and mother of the child. They're living together, they are physically together, but they are emotionally distant. They have grown emotionally distant. So the child is thinking about that. This is what the poem is all about. Fine. So, in a way, this poem portrays the complexities and challenges that come up with maintaining a long lasting relationship. So, that's what I told in the beginning of the poem, that it is a poem which observes the reality of romance and marriages in the long run. Okay, the reality, it is not what we see on screen, it is not what we see on social media platforms, but there is a reality when it comes to long term relationships, when it comes to a married couple, okay, or when it comes to a couple who is romantically engaged. So this poem talks about that reality which is there in long term relationships. And to convey that sense of separation, that sense of emotional distance, the poet is using powerful imagery. And it shows that fading passion between the couple and the acceptance of their present situation. Okay? So, through powerful imagery, the poet is conveying that sense of separation and that fading passion between that couple. So that is the gist of this poem. Now let's look at it more closely through a stanza wise analysis. The poem One Flesh, stanza 1. Lying apart now, each in a separate bed, he with a book, keeping the light on late, she like a girl dreaming of childhood, all men elsewhere. It is as if they wait some new event. The book he holds unread, her eyes fixed on the shadows overhead. So, as I told, the speaker of the poem is a child. We see the lines as the thoughts of a child, and the child is observing her parents with curiosity, with intrigue. And the child sees that her parents, they lie in bed beside each other, but there is a lack of intimacy. So the very first line itself gives that imagery. See, lying apart now, each in a separate bed. So that emotional disconnection captures that tension or that separation between the husband and a wife, or between the couple, or between the parents of that child. And then the child sees that her father or the man is holding a book. It is as if he is reading. Maybe he is not reading, he is just pretending to read so that he can avoid any sort of communication with the person lying next to him, that is his wife. And he has kept the light on late, which shows it is night, it is time to sleep, it is the time to settle everything and close the day and go to sleep. He has kept the light on late, which means he is staying awake or staying up late into the night. So it's like he is engaged in some other activity, he is reading maybe or pretending to read, which all means that he doesn't want to establish any sort of communication with the woman lying next to her, like next to him, that is his wife. Okay, and what about her? She, like a girl dreaming of childhood. So the child's mother, the woman, his wife, The woman is consumed with her thoughts about her past, about her childhood. It is as if she's comparing her past memories, her childhood memories, to her current reality. As she lies beside her husband, she might be thinking how happy she was in her past, and she might be thinking about the tensions, about the trials and tribulations that she's going on at present. And then the child again looks at its father, and she thinks that he is so immersed in his book, hmm, that it is actually like it is an escape from reality. He pretends as if he is elsewhere with the other people in that book, with the characters in that book. He is not in reality. He is in some other wonderland. He is in some other imaginary land, maybe with the characters of that book. He is not there in reality. He is not uh, interested, perhaps, in his reality. So the child feels that this is a form of escape uh, from the reality. It is as if he is waiting for some other adventure, some other thing, or anticipating the events in that book that he is reading. He's totally absorbed in it. He is, or maybe pretending to be totally absorbed in it, and not bothered about the person lying next to him or the reality that he is engaged in. So that's why the child says the book he holds unread. Hmm? He's holding that book, he's pretending as if he's reading, but the child feels that that is all a pretension. That is all an escape from this reality. He's holding it, but he's unreading it. He's not reading it. And what about its mother? Her eyes fixed on the shadows overhead. So, in her mind, in her head, there are the memories, the shadows of her past happy days, maybe her childhood memories. So, she is staring, physically staring at something or someone, or maybe her husband or the book, but mentally she's thinking about other things. So physically, they lie so close together, and yet the child understands that they seem so far apart, so distant in their thoughts. That is, they allow their minds to take them to two completely different and far apart places. Okay, so that is the first stanza. The first stanza itself gives a lot of images, or it introduces the theme of emotional distancing between the husband and the wife. Now, moving on to the second stanza. Tossed up like flotsam from a former passion. How cool they lie, they hardly ever touch, or if they do, it is like a confession of having little feeling or too much. Chastity faces them, a destination for which their whole lives bear a preparation. So, in this stanza, the child gives us many more images. In the very first line itself, the child says, their relationship now is like a flotsam. What is flotsam? Flotsam means waste, debris, or maybe the wreckage of a ship or its cargo that is floating on the surface of the sea. It can be wood, it can be wreckage or other materials washed ashore, some waste, some debris floating on the water. So the child says their relationship is just like that. Before, earlier, at one point, they were in love. At one point in their life, both of them were in love, were so full of passion for each other. But now, all that fire and storm has subsided, and now what remains is the debris, is the foam that floats on top of the ocean. Now they are very cool. The storm has ended, the passion has subsided. Now everything is in a cold state now. No passion, no vigor, no fire, no emotion as well. And that's when the child finds that they hardly ever touch, or if they do, it is like a confession of having little feeling or too much. So the child finds that her parents rarely touch each other anymore. And even when they do it, it is like it seems forced or out of necessity or an act of pretension. So now their relationship looks like very passionless, very fake, and a pretense. And in the last two lines of this stanza, the child becomes very satirical. The line reads like this: chastity faces them, a destination for which their whole lives were a preparation. What is chastity? Chastity refers to that state of abstaining from sexual activity, particularly outside of marriage. Okay? And during the earlier times, it was considered as a virtue. Chastity was a virtue that you have to be morally and sexually pure, and a person had to refrain from engaging in sexual relations before marriage. So it was taught to children as part of traditional values and religious teachings. And you have to understand that chastity is not limited to abstaining from sexual intercourse. It can also encompass abstaining from sexual thoughts, fantasies, or behaviors which were considered inappropriate or sinful within cultural or religious contexts. Okay, so anyway, chastity means abstaining from such thoughts or actions, especially before marriage. It means that maintaining that purity of body and soul. So the child says that all their life they were asked, maybe by her grandparents or that generation, they used to train their children to uphold such virtues, to be chaste, to not engage in sinful activities, etc. So all their life they were prepared, they were trained to have a very chaste mind and body. So the child very sarcastically feels that all the training is over and now my parents are practicing that. Now my parents are facing that. They are practicing chastity, and that is why they are showing this sort of emotional and physical distance to each other. So, what the poet, through the child, intends is that there will be a short storm of passion after marriage, but that will last only for a short period. In most cases, in most marriages, or in most long term relations, it's not that everybody is like that. There will be exceptions, of course, but mostly, generally, uh, the poet says that there will be this passion and fire and a lot of emotion in marriage only for a short period. And after that, people will turn cold to each other. All that emotion and passion will slowly die down. Okay, and people will return to what they have learned for their entire lives. They have been trained to abstain from sexual thoughts and actions throughout their life, and these people will return to that. Okay, so that is what the poet conveys. Now, the third and the last stanza: strangely apart, yet strangely close together, silence between them like a thread to hold and not wind in. And time itself is a feather touching them gently. Do they know they are old, these two, who are my father and my mother, whose fire from which I came has now grown cold? Now, in this stanza, the focus shifts from love and emotion to time. Time, as we all know, it is the greatest witness to everything. So the child says both of them are physically close to each other, but they are strangely apart. They are mentally away from each other. And the child is wondering whether parents are aware of the fact that they are getting old or that time is running short. They don't have much time left in their lives. We cannot predict what will happen the next moment, who will survive and who will be gone. Maybe we are at the flag end of our life. We don't know. So the child is wondering whether her parents are aware of all that they are spending the final moments of their life with a lack of passion and emotion. It is actually they are wasting the precious moments they have with one another. There won't be many more years, but her parents don't seem to realize that. Or maybe they realize it, but they are not ready to act accordingly, to solve the problems between them, to speak out, to communicate effectively, and resolve everything. They're not making a trial. And time is here described as a feather, reminding them gently that there is not much time left. Here, the child can see it, the child can understand it. The child can understand that the time, like a feather, is reminding her parents. But that couple, they cannot understand, they cannot realize it because they are too absorbed, too engrossed in their own separate worlds. They don't notice each other nor what is happening around them. They are ignoring everything intentionally. And finally, the child ends with a rhetorical question. It is asking, do they know that they are getting old? Do they know that time is passing by? They don't have much time left. And it is wondering, did I come from the passion of these two? These two who are my father and my mother. Was I born out of them? The child cannot believe that once upon a time they loved each other, they had feelings for each other, they cared for each other, they were passionate about each other. The child wonders if that was all true or if that happened. So, if they had that love and passion for each other, why has it turned so cold? The child is asking. And with that, the poem ends. So, the poem shows the growth, fall, and change in relationship with age and time. Earlier, it was strong, it was passionate, but as years passed by, it has become weak. The connection has become weak. There are only silences between them, and it has become as weak as a thread to hold. So, this is the poem, and through this poem, Jennings successfully creates an image of a married couple and also provides an interesting exploration of the way relationships, especially long term relationships, develop through time. So, that is it. And regarding the structure, the poem is written in traditional form. It consists of 3 stanzas of 6 lines each, and the rhythm is mainly regular and to a large extent in iambic pentameters. The first 2 stanzas have a similar rhyme scheme, ABA, BBA. The third one has a different rhyme scheme, AB, AB, AB. Okay, so this shows the contrast which exists between the first 2 stanzas and the third one. And the title also is significant. It is one flesh, which means they remain bonded to each other, but the passion that existed between them has dried up. They have become unemotional and they go through their life as though they are strangers. They have nothing to speak to each other. It is not that there is any animosity between them, any enmity between them. It is not that, but their need for each other has gone. So instead of becoming one flesh, they behave and live and exist as if they are 2 entities. The passion from which the child was born has now died down. So that is all the poem is all about. Thank you.